Let's go to Alan St. Pierre, who is the executive director of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Good morning, Alan. How are you, my man?
Good day.
All right, so you've been the executive director there for how long now?
7 years as the director of NORML and 14 as the director of the NORML Foundation.
What's the difference between NORML and NORML Foundation?
Sure. The IRS would distinguish it between NORML itself being the lobby group everybody's familiar with and the NORML Foundation, which does the education and litigation and can receive the really large donations.
Okay, I got you. And so your goal is what overall?
Since 1970, to make marijuana as legal and lawful as the responsible use of alcohol by adults.
Now, a couple of states we just saw have done that. Mm-hmm. Colorado and who was? Washington? Was that who it was?
Correct.
All right, so they have now legalized recreational use of marijuana. A lot of these states have this medical marijuana, and that's a bunch of baloney. I think you and I both know that the medical marijuana stuff, people who go in there and they're smoking the weed, they don't have any medical problems. I think it's sort of a joke, really. But these two states have legalized recreational use of marijuana, but it's still against federal law. What do you foresee happening in the future with this?
Well, it passes prologue, like you mentioned, with medical marijuana starting in 1996 when Californians voted for such. Today, 18 states and the District of Columbia have medical marijuana laws. So, what has the Fed done? Well, they certainly tried to stop us in court and lost in the 1990s in California. In this case, not allowing a doctor and a patient to have a communication, if you can believe that. So once they lost that case, it sort of opened up the door to the larger industry. Today, 6 or 7 states, like Colorado, have a very sophisticated radio frequency ID tag system that monitors the sale of marijuana to its sale. And the name of the program is Seed to Sale. And 60 Minutes did a piece on this a couple of weeks ago just before the election. So this is where we're at now. We're at a point where no matter what the federal government's laws are, and the fact that we even continue to keep losing in the Supreme Court pretty handily, for example, in 2005, when we were last there and lost in a 6-3 decision, there were 300 marijuana dispensaries in the United States. Today, there are over 5,000 of them. So I have to ask the question, what the heck did we lose?
You know, we've talked about this quite a bit on the show. In fact, we talked about that 60 Minutes piece. And I said, prior to the election, I said that it is possible that, you know, if you feel passionately about this issue, I said don't vote for Mitt Romney because here's a guy that, you know, won't even take caffeine because as a Mormon he believes it's a drug. So if you believe passionately in this issue, the guy to vote for was Barack Obama, and people said, Rover, the federal government will never legalize marijuana. And I said, look, I think that's nonsense. I think it's possible. And look, they've taken the step of saying we're not really going to enforce this. But, you know, I don't even smoke weed myself. I don't care. But we can't keep as I said on 60 Minutes, we can't keep this current system going, can we? Where states say it's okay, but the feds say it's not.
And that's exactly what's happening. There's now so much upward pressure now on the federal government to do something. So the day after the election, that Wednesday, I've been here at NORML 22 years. 15 years ago, many politicians here in D.C. treated us like lepers. They wouldn't even take our political action money. The day after the election, no less than 5 separate legislators contacted us to come in and write tax and regulate legislation for the next Congress. So elections have consequences, and in this case here, you're right, the election of Obama, the head of the Choom Gang in Hawaii, back in the 1970s, is in a very good position if a bill comes his way.
Well, now some people have said, well, other people, I think, sometimes, Alan, I think part of the problem that gets in the way of your argument, and no offense to pot smokers, you have a bunch of idiots advocating for the legalization of marijuana. One of the arguments I get frequently is from people who say, well, the government won't legalize it because they can't tax it and make money off of it. And I said, well, haven't you seen the 60 Minutes story? They seem to be doing a good job of it in Colorado. The other argument that I got into, a big argument after that 60 Minutes piece aired, was they said, well, if they legalize it, the big pharmaceutical industries, they don't want it to become legal because people will just grow it themselves. And I said, people are friggin' lazy. You could grow. I mean, no one's going to be growing their own pot, right?
Well, let's put this into some perspective. In the states of Washington and Colorado, Washington does not allow home cultivation. You have to go to a retail store and buy it. In Colorado, you can only grow 6 marijuana plants, for which only 3 can be mature. Now, to your larger point about just us being lazy consumers, exactly correct. 99% of the beer-consuming market in this country goes out and buys the beer in the amount they want, when they want, the type that they want. Very few of us are aficionados to the point where we will brew our own beer, even though it's been legal for years to do. I'd make the same case for jellies and jams, too. We can all do that, but very few of us will take the time and effort to do so. And I frankly think in 10 or 20 years, when marijuana is decidedly illegal across this country, 98 to 99% of people who want cannabis will go to either a state-run store or a private licensee to purchase it.
Do you think that big business will get involved? I mean, I'm assuming that maybe there is a pushback from the pharmaceutical companies. I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing that maybe they go, hey, we sell all of these drugs. We don't want marijuana to be legalized because maybe people will use that instead of our drugs. Is there that pushback?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. If I can bifurcate the two things you just raised there, one is that, yes, historically, alcohol, tobacco, pharmaceutical companies, along with law enforcement, the bureaucracies born of prohibition, like the ONDCP, the Drug Czar's office, as it's known, the DARE program, Partnership for Drug-Free America, blah-blah-blah-blah. Of course, they all oppose it. They're born of the prohibition. And then you've got my favorite, the private prison companies, the drug testing companies. They all we get up every day here at NORML and have to oppose them, not because they're anti-free market. They just simply want the prohibition to last because it works for them. But on the other side of this, there's no doubt that a tobacco company, any of them today, who is in the best position today to buy dried vegetable matter, package it, market it, and get it out the door? So even though most of us are probably not keen on that, hey, we live in a world of, if I can use brand names like Walmart's and Costco's, blah-blah-blah, there's no reason why marijuana consumers should be utopian about the idea that for a lot of people, they will be going to a mass producer to buy the product at low costs.
Do you believe, Alan, here's what a lot of people say. I'll bring up this point that I just mentioned earlier, that you have a lot of idiots advocating for the legalization of marijuana. Another common thing I hear people say is marijuana doesn't affect driving, and marijuana has never killed anyone in the history of the world. Now, just on the face of it, those are ridiculous arguments.
Sure. Well, when it comes to driving, while the science is pretty clear, there's no comparison to how much alcohol impairs individuals compared to marijuana. Nobody who's sane is going to get up before a legislative body or a judge and make the argument that somebody drives better while they've used marijuana.
Oh, I hear that argument from people who call into the show all the time, though, Alan.
As somebody like myself who's done over 20,000 of these radio shows since the early 1990s, yeah, I get these calls all the time, too. And even though, again, the science may support them on that, it's so impractical. No insurance company in the world is going to touch the idea of people driving, while smoking marijuana or having just recently smoked it. Let me just do one public service announcement, if I could here. For anybody who smokes marijuana, whether it's very potent or very mild, do not drive a car for 120 minutes after you've used marijuana. After that 120-minute mark, you're good to go.
Now, what about now there is no testing for it. My understanding, for instance, if you are driving, I think that could be a big barrier to getting it legalized. That people who may be on the fence on this position, Alan, they say, well, maybe I could see, but I don't want, the 19-year-old kids going out smoking weed and then getting in a car like they did with alcohol and driving around because that could be dangerous. But there's no way for police departments to test to see if you're under the influence of marijuana, like they can with a breathalyzer, for instance.
They can. It's just certainly not as easy. What can happen is if you're driving down the road, I promise you this, if you're driving down the interstate in Ohio or whatnot, and you get pulled over and the car smells like marijuana, and the police want to drug test you, they will drug test you, whether they'll draw your hair, they'll draw your urine, or better, they will draw your blood. And from the actual parent source, the THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, you can get down from having used marijuana weeks ago, which is unfortunately what urine and hair tells tells the authority, down to a window of about 3 to 5 hours. Juries have no problem usually convicting, even though, as I mentioned a moment ago, at the 120-minute mark, you're certainly no longer impaired from the marijuana. So you're right. At the moment, there's no easy roadside test. We learned the lesson 2 years ago in California when they rejected legalization by only 3 percentage points, that one of the reasons why was there was nothing clear in there about DUID and standards for driving under the influence of marijuana. Washington State proponents learned that lesson, put it right into the law, put a 5 nanogram per milliliter limit in there, and as we found out later in the postmortem dealing with the post-election results, women who put this over the top in Washington State, they said they wanted to see those drug driving provisions in there for all logical reasons.
Alan, do you smoke weed yourself? I'm guessing.
I have for many a decade.
Is there any ill health effects? I mean, people go, well, it doesn't cause cancer, it doesn't do that. Now, I know studies, but I guess just on a common sense sort of level, if you're inhaling smoke of any kind frequently, I would assume that some health risks would come out of it.
Let's begin with the obvious. If you take smoke into your body, that's not a wise health decision, whether the source of that smoke happens to be tobacco or marijuana. But the big question is, in America, is it unlawful? Is it a sign of moral turpitude if you use marijuana as compared to tobacco? Tobacco kills 400,000 people per year in this country. To the point you raised earlier, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, indicates nobody virtually dies in the United States because of their use of marijuana in the same manner that you do because of tobacco. It's truly apples and oranges. But again, acknowledging it's an unhealthy decision to choose to either vaporize or to smoke marijuana. This is, of course, why some people insist that they want to eat it or use it as a salve and put it onto their skin. On the other side of this discussion is one of my favorite examples. There are 7 people in the United States at the time, this is 8 years ago, that received 300 marijuana cigarettes a month from our federal government, big bombers, 1-gram joints, and they get it free through something called the Compassionate IND program. And they were in the program. They are in the program now. There's only 4 left in it. They had been in it for 20 years. They'd consumed copious amounts, pounds and pounds of marijuana. And when I met most of them, I said, have you ever been tested? Has anybody ever put you through the full, morphological, respiratory, pulmonary? He said, no. I said, wait a minute. We've got 18,000 studies on marijuana, but the government and we, the taxpayers, have been providing you all this marijuana for decades, and nobody's ever put you through the rigors. So they all flew to the University of Montana in Missoula, and a doctor named Ethan Russo, R-U-S-S-O, put them through the rigors, published it in a peer-reviewed publication, and here's the sum. If you smoke a lot of marijuana, like, say, 10 ounces a month for your entire life, what this study basically said is by the time you turn 60 to 70 years old, you'll develop a pre-bronchial wheeze. No surprise, I think, in this regard. But regarding, like, brain function, short-term memory, sexual function, motivation, no, none of those things are affected, even by people using a lot of marijuana.
Before I let Alan St. Pierre go, he is the executive director of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Most of you know that as NORML. Let me take a couple of phone calls of people that want to talk to Alan quickly. Kendra, you're on with Alan St. Pierre. Go ahead, Kendra.
Hi, I was just wondering, my uncle got busted in Oklahoma, and he had around 500 pounds, and he's serving 40 years. Now, what do you think would happen if they did eventually legalize it in Oklahoma?
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt. And we're seeing this, by the way. As soon as marijuana was legalized by the voters last Tuesday, the prosecutors in Denver and Seattle and many counties immediately stopped prosecuting and let go out of the jails people who were about to be prosecuted, people involved with marijuana-related charges. For somebody who's already incarcerated, clearly the law's got to change there, and there's no reason why anybody should be in jail for a law once the law has changed.
Even with, what did she say, 500 pounds of marijuana? I mean, that's like a friggin' semi-truck.
No, that's an awesome, and really, if we just think for a moment here, that person is really in violation, not so much of I would suggest, a moral crime, but, he didn't pay taxes, he was skirting regulations and laws, and in the future, if you get caught with 500 pounds of marijuana, that's what you get busted for, tax evasion.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to Patrick. You're on Rover's Morning Glory with Alan St. Pierre from NORML. Go ahead, Patrick.
Hey, Pat, how's it going? Hey, Rover, how's it going, buddy?
Good.
Hey, I had a question. How would you buy the weed now that it's legalized in Colorado and Washington State? You know, how they set it up? Is it like in Rite Aids? Is it in is it in gas stations? I mean, how are they going to have that set up? Like single shops where you just go in and buy it?
Sure, good question. Both states have to promulgate the rules and make this all happen. Starting the 6th of December, though, both states will have marijuana go from being a crime where you get busted to nothing, a zero fine if you get caught with it. Each state has a year to promulgate regulations. What will it look like? It will probably look very much like the way that alcohol is distributed in your state. There could be private licensees that develop, I'll use a brand name here, like a Starbucks model. But again, right now, neither law envisions people using the drug on site, only people taking it and using it at home, the same way that if you went to a state-run package store, you couldn't just open the bottle of beer and use it right there.
And Paul has a question for Alan St. Pierre of NORML. Go ahead, Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Hey.
Yes, quickly.
I was just wondering, I heard a lot of arguments that with the legalization of cannabis, it's going to affect the timber industry. I think I read something like 300,000 jobs are in jeopardy with if hemp became legal to use.
If hemp became legal to use, that would affect the timber industry, you say. And
Well, in the United States, hemp is illegal, which is the point here. All the rest of the world, including Canada, can grow the non-psychoactive strain of the plant for industrial purposes. I'd suggest in the United States we probably wouldn't lose a lot on the timber industry side, but we would gain a whole lot on the industrial hemp side in our Midwest.
Why is hemp? Can anyone explain why hemp is illegal? Is there?
Well, unfortunately, it's just caught up in the larger prohibition. It makes no sense whatsoever. Hemp is legal in the Philippines, China, France, Canada, and I dare say if it's good enough for the 51st state, it's good enough for America.
Alan St. Pierre is the executive director of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML, as you know it. Their website, NORML.org. And before I let you go, prediction. If I were to talk to you 4 years from now, what will have changed over the next 4 years?
Any place where salt water touches our western United States, marijuana will have been legal. All of the New England states will have largely gone legal, and many of our Rocky Mountain states. And we will have decades of infilling the Midwest. I will remind folks that Oklahoma and Kansas and a number of other states did not legalize alcohol until the late 1950s. So it's not going to happen altogether across this country unless the federal government engages in this in a major way and removes the prohibition at the federal level. Otherwise, the states are going to keep forcing the federal government into a corner.
And Alan doesn't want it to happen too quickly because then he'd be out of a job as the executive director of NORML. Well, Alan, I appreciate you coming on, my man, and good luck with your cause.
Thanks, Rover. Be in touch and have a very hempful day.
Thank you, Alan St. Pierre. Hempful day. Is that what he said? Hempful day?
Yeah.